My knees ached as I took each slow step into that courtroom. The air was heavy, filled with whispers and the faint shuffle of papers. I clutched my leather handbag close, trying to steady the tremor in my hands. It wasn't the first time I'd faced judgment in my life, but it was the first time my own son was sitting on the opposite side, waiting to tear me apart. Brandon didn't even look at me. He just sighed, leaned toward his wife Vanessa, and the two of them rolled their eyes as if my very presence was an inconvenience. My heart squeezed, the kind of pain no mother ever gets used to. I wanted to tell myself I'd imagined it, that I'd read their faces wrong, but I hadn't. I knew that look. It was the same one I'd seen when he was a teenager who thought I was too old, too out of touch, too unworthy of his time. But this was worse. This was hatred dressed up as indifference. I took my seat beside my lawyer, Thomas Morrison, trying to keep my back straight, my chin up. The courtroom smelled faintly of wood polish and nerves. I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. Then the bailiff's voice cut through the tension. All rise for the Honorable Judge William Hartley. Everyone stood. I rose too, leaning a little on the edge of the table for support. When the judge walked in, I expected just another stranger in a robe, someone who'd read the papers, nod, and pass judgment. But when his eyes found mine, everything stopped. For a moment, the world fell completely silent. His gaze lingered, sharp and searching, as if he were trying to remember a face he hadn't seen in decades. His hand froze halfway through adjusting his glasses. I saw it, the flicker of recognition, confusion, disbelief. He looked down at the documents, then back up at me, and his voice came out slower than before. Wait, the charges are against you? Across the room, Vanessa smirked. Brandon folded his arms, pretending to look bored. But the judge's reaction told me this case wasn't going to unfold the way they expected. At that moment, sitting under those bright courtroom lights, I felt the weight of 72 years pressing down on me, love, loss, sacrifice, and a kind of heartbreak no mother should ever have to bear. But I also felt something else stirring deep inside me, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Strength. Before I tell you how my own son tried to destroy me, hit that like button, subscribe to this channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because this one will make your heart ache. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The mornings were the hardest. Every day I woke to the same stillness, no footsteps in the hallway, no soft hum of the coffee machine Victor always turned on before I even opened my eyes. Just silence. The kind that pressed on your chest until you almost forgot how to breathe. I still reached for his side of the bed out of habit, tracing the cool sheets where his warmth used to be. After 47 years, you don't just lose a husband, you lose half your rhythm. Victor had passed 14 months before that courtroom day. A heart attack on a golf course, quick, they said. Painless. As if the word painless could comfort anyone left behind. He'd built an empire from nothing, a cybersecurity company born in our tiny garage in 1989 that grew until people called him a genius. To me, though, he was just Victor, the man who danced with me in the kitchen when bills were late and the roof leaked, the man who believed that love could fix anything. Our home in Napa Valley had once felt alive. Victor's laughter filled every hallway, and our son Brandon's voice used to echo from the backyard as he kicked a soccer ball against the fence. Now the same house sounded hollow. Every tick of the grandfather clock felt like a reminder that time had moved on, without me. That morning, I made myself tea instead of coffee. Victor had always said caffeine made my hands shake. I caught my reflection in the kitchen window, hair silver now, eyes red-rimmed from another sleepless night, and whispered, "You promised we'd grow old together." The empty room didn't answer. The funeral had been grand, the kind of event Victor's colleagues expected. Suits, black limousines, floral arrangements so large they blocked the view of the altar. I remember clutching a small framed photo of him in college, his smile wide, his tie crooked, that spark in his eyes before money ever mattered. Brandon arrived late. He swept into the church wearing a designer suit and a face carved out of stone. He hugged me the way one greets a business acquaintance, polite, distant, quick. "Sorry for your loss, Mom," he said. My loss. Not our loss. Those two words told me everything I hadn't wanted to see. Vanessa stood beside him like a sculpture, tall, elegant, her perfume heavy enough to drown in. She murmured something to him, lips barely moving, eyes flicking toward me with a look I couldn't read then but understand too well now. During the eulogy, I tried to speak but my throat locked. Thomas Morrison, Victor's longtime lawyer, stepped in and read the words Victor had once written about our marriage for an anniversary speech. "She's the reason I built anything at all," it said. The guests applauded softly. Brandon stared at his watch. After the service, people came to shake my hand, offer condolences, and talk about Victor's brilliance. Brandon didn't stay long. "We've got an early flight," he muttered. Vanessa smiled, a small, polite curve of the lips that didn't reach her eyes. They were gone before I reached the parking lot. I told myself they were grieving in their own way. That lie kept me upright for weeks. Grief makes you invent excuses for people who don't deserve them. At night I sat in the living room surrounded by memories, framed photos from birthdays, dusty trophies from Brandon's childhood, travel souvenirs Victor and I collected through the years. The house felt too large, every corner whispering stories no one else wanted to hear. One evening, the landline rang. For a moment my heart leapt, expecting Victor's voice even though I knew that was impossible. It was Thomas, calling to schedule the reading of the will. 2 weeks later, I found myself in his office, a room lined with law books and the smell of old paper. Brandon sat across from me, Vanessa beside him, tapping her manicured nails on the armrest. The rhythm matched the pounding in my chest. Thomas spoke gently, but every sentence hit like a hammer. Victor had left everything to me, the estate, the investments, the cars, every share of the company he'd built. Brandon would receive $500,000 and his father's collection of first-edition science fiction novels. Silence followed. The kind that vibrates. Vanessa was the first to break it. "That can't be right," she said. "Victor promised Brandon would be taken care of." Thomas nodded politely. "He is. $500,000 is considerable." "Considerable?" Brandon's voice rose. "My father was worth nearly $100 million, and you expect me to believe this is fair?" I tried to speak, but my lips trembled. "Brandon, your father wanted to be sure I'd be comfortable. Whatever I have will be yours one day. Eventually." Vanessa laughed softly, the sound sharp as glass. "You could live another 20 years, Ruth. What are we supposed to do until then?" "We. Always we." Thomas cleared his throat and slid an envelope toward me. "Victor left a letter. For you alone." I tucked it into my handbag, unable to read it there under their glare. The drive home felt endless. I parked the car, walked into the silent house, and sat at Victor's old desk. The envelope trembled in my hands. Inside was a single sheet in his familiar handwriting. "My dearest Ruth. If you're reading this, I'm gone. Please don't cry too long. You gave up everything for me, your career, your ambitions, and you never once asked for more. That's why I left it all to you. You earned it by being the kindest, strongest person I've ever known. I love our son, but you and I both know he's grown selfish. Don't let guilt steal what's yours. Live, travel, be happy. And when the loneliness feels heavy, remember, I always believed you were the better half of us." I pressed the paper to my chest and sobbed until the ink blurred. For a while, the words kept me company. They were the last gift from a man who had always seen me, even when our son couldn't. Weeks passed, each one quieter than the last. Brandon didn't call. Vanessa sent a single text asking if I'd had time to think about the estate, as if grief were a spreadsheet to be managed. I ignored it. One afternoon, while watering Victor's roses, I saw a car pull into the driveway, Brandon's sleek black sedan. My heart jumped, maybe he'd come to check on me, to share memories of his father. But the moment he stepped out, briefcase in hand, I knew better. Vanessa followed, her smile practiced. They walked through the door without waiting to be invited. Mom, Brandon said, scanning the house like a realtor. We need to talk about your finances. My finances? It's a lot to manage, Vanessa said sweetly. Maybe too much for one person, especially at your age. We just want to help. Help. The word tasted bitter. I tried to keep my tone calm. I'm fine, thank you. Your father prepared everything carefully. I'm not struggling. Brandon's jaw tightened. You can barely open a jar, Mom. How are you going to handle millions? The comment hit harder than any slap. I've managed a household, raised a child, and supported a company from our garage to global success. I think I can handle a checkbook. He looked away. Vanessa pretended to sigh. We're just worried you'll be taken advantage of. That was the moment the seed was planted. Concern that felt more like calculation. When they left, the echo of their voices lingered in the hallway long after the door closed. I stood there staring at Victor's photo, my reflection faintly visible in the glass. Have you ever felt invisible to someone you loved the most? I whispered. No one answered. Only the roses outside rustled in the wind. 2 weeks after Victor's funeral, I found myself back in Thomas Morrison's law office. The place smelled faintly of cedar and old books, the kind of scent that usually felt comforting. Not that day. The city outside buzzed with life, but inside, the air felt heavy. I sat at the end of a long mahogany table, hands folded over my handbag, trying to calm the flutter in my chest. Across from me sat Brandon and Vanessa. They looked like they'd come straight from a magazine, perfectly coordinated, faces smooth and unreadable. Thomas entered carrying a thick folder, his expression solemn. Mrs. Callahan, Mr. Callahan, thank you for coming. He adjusted his glasses and began reading. His voice was steady, but every word felt like a stone dropped into still water. I, Victor Callahan, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this my final will and testament. I listened, waiting for the part where Victor would divide his legacy, maybe half for me, half for Brandon. That would have been fair. That would have kept peace. But fairness has nothing to do with love or truth. Thomas's tone didn't change when he reached the critical line. All assets, investments, and properties shall be transferred to my wife, Ruth Callahan. For a moment, no one spoke. The ticking of the wall clock grew louder until it was all I could hear. Brandon blinked, a slow, disbelieving motion. I'm sorry, what? Thomas continued, calm as ever. A trust of $500,000 has been established in your name, Brandon, along with your father's collection of first-edition novels. The color drained from my son's face. Vanessa's nails clicked softly against the table. That can't be right, she said. Victor promised Brandon he'd be taken care of. He has been, Thomas replied evenly. $500,000 is a substantial inheritance. Brandon leaned forward, his voice sharp. My father built a company worth almost $100 million. You expect me to believe this was his idea? I tried to intervene, my words stumbling. Brandon, sweetheart, your father trusted me to handle everything responsibly. You'll have it all one day. He cut me off. One day? You could live another 30 years, Mom. Do you expect me to wait until you're gone? His words hit like a slap. The room tilted. Vanessa didn't even look embarrassed, she just smirked slightly, eyes cold. Brandon, I whispered, this isn't about money. It's about what your father wanted. Then he wasn't thinking clearly, Vanessa said smoothly. Grief affects judgment. Maybe you influenced him? Thomas's pen paused mid-note. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. I would advise you to be careful with your words, Thomas said. Mr. Callahan's decisions were made with full mental capacity. His physician, business partner, and I were all witnesses to his clarity. Brandon pushed his chair back with a harsh scrape. This is ridiculous. My father would never leave me out like this. He always said the company would be mine. Tears stung my eyes. You were always part of his plans, Brandon. He wanted you to earn your own success, not wait for ours to end. Vanessa rose, straightening her blazer. We'll be in touch. They walked out without another glance. The echo of the door closing sounded like the end of something sacred. I stayed seated, too numb to move. Thomas slid an envelope toward me, cream paper, Victor's handwriting across the front. For Ruth. I took it with trembling fingers. Would you like some time? He asked softly. I nodded, unable to speak. That night, I sat at Victor's old desk, the lamp casting a warm circle of light across the paper. The house was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and my heartbeat in my ears. When I finally unfolded the letter, his words felt alive, as if he were in the room again. My dearest Ruth. If you're reading this, I'm gone. I wish I could be there to hold your hand, but please don't be sad for long. You've been my greatest strength. Everything I've built, I built because you believed in me when no one else did. I know you're wondering why I left the estate entirely to you. The answer is simple, you earned it. You gave up your dreams for mine, your career for our son, and your youth for our future. That's a debt I can never repay, but I'm trying, even now. I left Brandon what I believe he deserves, and no more. I've watched him grow into a man who measures love by what he can gain. I kept hoping time would soften him, but it hasn't. If he ever tries to challenge you, don't let guilt weaken you. You've spent a lifetime giving. Now it's your turn to keep something for yourself. All my love. Victor. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. My hands trembled, not from pain this time, but from the realization that Victor had seen the truth long before I did. I pressed the letter to my chest and whispered into the quiet, "You always did know how to protect me." For hours I sat there, lost between grief and gratitude, missing the sound of his laugh, the steady warmth of his presence. By morning, I thought I'd cried myself empty. But when I glanced at my phone and saw no message from Brandon, not an apology, not even a word, the tears started again. He hadn't lost his father that day. He'd lost his humanity. I folded Victor's letter carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and locked it in the drawer. Somewhere deep inside, I felt something small and sharp flicker to life, the faintest spark of anger. I didn't know it then, but that spark would carry me all the way to the courtroom. If you've ever had someone you love turn against you for money, drop it in the comments. This story hits deep. The first visit came 2 weeks after the will reading. I wasn't expecting company. I just settled in the kitchen, trying to open a jar of marmalade when the doorbell rang. My wrists ached from arthritis, and the sound startled me enough that the jar slipped and clattered onto the counter. Through the frosted glass, I saw the outline of 2 figures, tall, poised, confident. For a second, I thought I was imagining things. But when I opened the door, there they were, Brandon and Vanessa. "Mom," he said, voice flat but polite. "Can we come in?" I hesitated. Of course. They stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, the scent of expensive perfume filling the hall. Vanessa looked around like an appraiser inspecting property. "You've kept everything exactly the same," she said. "It's nostalgic." Her smile was all teeth. Brandon followed her gaze, eyes drifting across family photos, the floral curtains, Victor's armchair still beside the fireplace. He sighed like someone stepping into a place they'd outgrown. "I wanted to see how you were doing," he said. I forced a small smile. "I'm managing. The house feels a bit empty, but I keep busy." Vanessa crossed her arms. "That's what we're worried about." "Worried?" I asked, setting the jar back on the counter. "You're alone here, Mom," Brandon said, his tone too controlled. "Dad left you with a lot of responsibility. We just think it might be too much for you to handle at your age." I felt my jaw tighten. "I'm 71, not helpless." "I didn't mean it that way," he said quickly, though his eyes told a different story. "It's just, finances, investments, taxes, it's complicated stuff." "I've lived through 4 recessions, Brandon," I replied, trying to sound calm. "I can balance a checkbook." Vanessa laughed softly. We're not saying you can't. We just think you'd be less stressed if someone younger handled things for you. Younger. Smarter. Better, that's what she meant. I appreciate the concern, I said. But your father's lawyer is managing everything. He's been with us for decades. Brandon leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You don't have to trust him blindly. Maybe let me take a look at the accounts, just to make sure everything's secure. My heart thudded. You think Thomas would take advantage of me? He hesitated. I think people might. And I'd rather it be me than some stranger. There it was, the first crack in the polite facade. Your father trusted Thomas completely, I said. Brandon's eyes hardened. Dad wasn't himself at the end. You know that. The sentence hung in the air like poison. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. Your father was sharp until the day he died. Vanessa touched his arm. Let's not upset her. She's been through a lot. Her tone carried the sort of sweetness people use when they've already decided you're fragile. They stayed another 20 minutes, drinking tea they didn't finish. Before leaving, Brandon hugged me, stiff, brief, like it was a duty he couldn't wait to end. When the door finally closed, I stood in the hallway staring at the teacups on the table. The lipstick stain on Vanessa's cup glared back at me like a signature of disrespect. I should have known that wasn't the last visit. The second came 3 days later, unannounced again. This time Brandon arrived alone. I was in the living room trying to massage the stiffness from my hands when I heard his car pull into the driveway. He let himself in, calling out, "Mom," as if he still lived there. I looked up. Brandon, you could have called first. I was in the area. He dropped onto the sofa, loosening his tie. Thought I'd check on you. His gaze flicked to my swollen fingers. You still haven't hired help? You shouldn't be alone here. I don't need help, I said quietly. Mom, be realistic. He gestured around the room. This house is massive. The garden alone needs a crew. You can't keep doing this yourself. I like my garden. It gives me something to wake up for. He sighed, exasperated. You're being stubborn. I set my hands in my lap. And you're being disrespectful. The sharpness in my tone startled even me. For a moment he softened. I just want to make sure you're not taken advantage of. I'm fine. He leaned forward. Vanessa and I talked to a lawyer. We just want to ensure Dad's will reflected his actual intentions. He wasn't thinking clearly when he changed it. I stared at him. What are you implying? That maybe you encouraged him. My throat tightened. Brandon. You have to admit it's strange, Mom. He built that company for us, for me, and suddenly everything's in your name? It doesn't add up. I rose slowly, joints aching. Your father made his choices. If you can't respect them, that's your problem. His jaw clenched. So that's it? You're just going to hoard everything until you die? The cruelty in his tone froze me. For a long moment neither of us spoke. He looked away first. I didn't mean that, he muttered, but the apology felt hollow. I turned toward the window, needing space. Outside, the afternoon light fell across Victor's roses, each one in full bloom. I remembered him planting them, his hands covered in soil, his laughter drifting through the yard. Brandon stood, smoothing his jacket. Think about what I said. When he left, the silence felt heavier than before. That night, my arthritis flared so badly I couldn't hold a spoon. As I sat at the table staring at the untouched bowl of soup, I realized something that broke me more than any insult could. My son didn't see me as a mother anymore. I was an obstacle. A wall between him and the fortune he believed was his by right. I went to bed early but couldn't sleep. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw Victor's handwriting on that letter. Don't let guilt weaken you. Days turned into weeks. Letters from lawyers began to arrive, requests for financial statements, questions about the will. My hands shook every time I opened the mailbox. Patty called one evening. "You sound exhausted," she said. "I am. You know what's coming, don't you?" "I think I do." "Then promise me you won't let them break you." I hesitated. "He's my son, Patty." "I know. But he's also an adult making his own choices. Don't confuse love with permission." That night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror brushing my hair. The woman staring back looked older than her years, tired eyes, shoulders slumped, lips pressed thin from too many swallowed words. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet anger began to stir. It wasn't loud, not yet, but it was steady, the same resolve that once made me strong enough to raise a family and support a husband who built an empire from nothing. I whispered to my reflection, "You're still in there, Ruth. Don't let them bury you." It arrived on a Thursday morning, tucked between a grocery catalog and a water bill. A thick white envelope stamped with the words, "Callahan vs. Callahan." At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then I saw the signature at the bottom, Brandon Callahan, plaintiff. For a long moment, I just stood at the mailbox, my fingers frozen. A neighbor waved from across the street, but I couldn't move or respond. The world blurred at the edges. When I finally stepped inside, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the papers spread out before me. Petition to contest will. The words felt foreign, like they belonged to someone else's life. They were accusing me of manipulating Victor. Claiming that my husband, my partner of nearly 5 decades, hadn't been in his right mind when he signed his will. They said I'd coerced him. Stolen from him. My vision swam. The arthritis in my hands flared until I could barely hold the pages. I pressed my palms to the table, breathing through the pain. I called Thomas Morrison, my voice trembling. "They're suing me," I whispered. He sighed heavily. "I've seen the filing, Ruth. It's aggressive. They've hired Richard Cross, he's known for playing dirty." "Can they do this?" "They can file anything," he said gently. "Winning is another story. But I won't lie, it's going to be ugly." Ugly didn't begin to cover it. The weeks that followed were a blur of humiliation and exhaustion. Letters arrived daily, requests for financial statements, phone records, even Victor's medical reports. Brandon's lawyer demanded access to everything, as if I were a criminal hiding evidence. Each envelope tore a little more of my heart apart. Sleep became a stranger. Every creak of the old house at night felt like an accusation. I lost track of meals, of time, of days. My hands hurt so badly I could barely button my blouse. One morning, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her shoulders sagged, her eyes dull and rimmed with red. That afternoon, Patty showed up. My best friend since college, Brandon's godmother, and one of the few people who still called without asking for anything. The moment she saw my face, she dropped her purse and wrapped her arms around me. "Oh, Ruth. You look like you've been through a war." "I have," I said softly. "My son's the enemy general." We sat in the living room. She poured tea while I unfolded the latest letter, another demand for records. She read it in silence, then shook her head. "He's trying to break you down, honey. Make you too tired to fight." "It's working." Patty set her cup down with a soft clink. "No, it's not. You're still here. That means you haven't given up." I looked at her, my voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe I should. Maybe if I settle, he'll stop." "Settle?" she repeated, disbelief in her tone. "You'd hand over Victor's legacy just to buy peace?" "I'm tired, Patty." I woke up aching. My own son treats me like a stranger. I don't even know who he is anymore. Her eyes softened. "Then stop trying to get to know him. Know yourself again. You used to be unstoppable. I used to have a reason." She leaned forward, gripping my hands carefully. "Then find a new one. Fight for the woman Victor loved. Fight for the one you buried under grief. Something inside me cracked, like ice giving way beneath the first rays of spring. After she left, I sat alone for a long time, staring at the stack of legal papers. The setting sun painted the walls gold, and for the first time in months, I didn't see a victim in that light. I saw a survivor. I walked to Victor's study. The faint scent of his cologne still lingered in the air. On the desk sat a framed photo of us on our wedding day, two kids who had no idea what life would demand of them. "I'm sorry, Victor," I whispered. "I should have been stronger sooner." My hands trembled as I picked up the phone and called Thomas. "Thomas," I said when he answered. My voice was steadier than I expected. "Tell Richard Cross we're not settling. I want my day in court." There was a pause on the line, then a slow exhale. That's the Ruth I remember. That night, I slept for the first time in weeks. The next morning, I woke before dawn, pain pulsing in my knuckles, but my heart was lighter than it had been in months. I opened the curtains and let the early light spill across the room. On the table were all the letters Brandon's lawyer had sent. I gathered them into a neat stack, tied them with a ribbon, and placed them in a box labeled evidence. If they wanted a fight, they'd get one. Would you fight back if your own child dragged you to court? Tell me in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. I need to know what you'd do. The morning of the trial, I woke before sunrise. My heart thudded so loudly it felt like it might crack my ribs. I stood in front of the mirror, pulling my silver hair into a neat bun. The navy suit I'd chosen was simple, dignified, the same one I wore to Victor's funeral. As I buttoned the jacket, my hands trembled, but not from fear. From resolve. When I stepped outside, the air was cool and sharp, like the world itself was holding its breath. Thomas Morrison met me at the courthouse steps. "You ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be," I replied. The courthouse loomed ahead, marble floors, echoing halls, the faint scent of polish and paper. Each step toward the courtroom felt heavier, but I kept walking. Inside, the air buzzed with whispers. Brandon and Vanessa sat at the plaintiff's table with their lawyer, Richard Cross. Brandon's posture was smug, Vanessa's smile, thin as a blade. I took my seat beside Thomas, clutching my handbag. The moment my heels clicked against the floor, Brandon looked up, saw me, and rolled his eyes. Vanessa whispered something, and they both chuckled under their breath. So that's what I was now, a joke to them. All rise for the Honorable Judge William Hartley. Everyone stood. I did too, pressing a hand to my aching hip. The judge entered, papers in hand, his gaze sweeping across the room. When his eyes found me, he paused. A flicker of recognition crossed his face, surprise, disbelief, then something else entirely. He cleared his throat. "The court calls the case of Brandon Callahan versus Ruth Callahan, petition to contest the will of Victor Callahan." He looked down at the papers again, then up at me. "Let me be clear, the charges are against you, Mrs. Callahan?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said softly. For a moment, the room was still. Then he leaned back slightly, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Mr. Cross, you may begin," he said finally. Richard Cross stood, tall and confident, his voice smooth as polished marble. "Your Honor," he began, "this is not a case of greed, but of justice. My client, Brandon Callahan, lost not only his father but his rightful inheritance. The evidence will show that in his final years, Victor Callahan's mental state declined, leaving him vulnerable to manipulation by his wife, Ruth Callahan." His words dripped poison, each one deliberate. "She isolated Victor," he continued, pacing slowly. "She cut him off from friends, from business associates, even from his own son. She exploited her position as caretaker to influence his will. What we have here, Your Honor, is undue influence, plain and simple." I sat perfectly still, nails digging into my palm beneath the table. Every word felt like a slap. Cross gestured toward me. "The defense will claim Mrs. Callahan is a devoted wife. But we will prove she was motivated by greed, and that Victor Callahan was no longer of sound mind when he signed his will." He returned to his seat with a smug nod. Thomas stood next. Calm. Controlled. The kind of presence that filled a room without ever needing to shout. Your Honor, he began, the evidence will indeed show the truth, but not the one Mr. Cross just performed for you. A few soft chuckles rippled through the gallery. Victor Callahan was a brilliant man until the day he died, Thomas continued. His doctors, business partners, and advisors will confirm he was clear-minded, healthy, and deliberate. He wasn't manipulated. He made choices based on love and clarity, not confusion or coercion. He turned toward Brandon. This case isn't about Victor's will. It's about entitlement. About a son who neglected his parents for years, only to return when there was money to claim. Brandon shifted in his seat, face darkening. Thomas nodded once. We will show that Victor acted out of reason, not influence, and that this claim is nothing more than an attempt to rewrite guilt into profit. The judge raised an eyebrow. Well said. Proceed. Cross called his first witnesses, Brandon's friends, a financial analyst, even a so-called specialist in elder influence. None of them had real evidence. Just assumptions. Their testimonies were long, dramatic, hollow. By midday, Cross was confident. He smirked as if he'd already won. Then it was Thomas's turn. Your Honor, he said, the defense would like to submit a recording, a statement from Victor Callahan, made 6 months before his death. Cross's composure cracked. Objection, Your Honor. This is overruled, Judge Hartley said. Proceed. The courtroom lights dimmed. Thomas pressed play. The screen flickered to life, and there he was, Victor. Alive again. Sitting in his study, looking straight into the camera. My breath caught. My name is Victor Callahan, his voice filled the courtroom. I'm making this recording to explain my will and the reasons for my decisions. He spoke slowly, with the same calm authority that had once commanded boardrooms. I'm leaving my estate to my wife, Ruth, because she deserves it. She gave up her dreams so I could chase mine. She's been my partner in every sense of the word. As for my son, Brandon, he's had every advantage I could give. But he's grown distant. He calls only when he needs something. Money, advice, connections. Rarely does he ask how his mother is. Gasps rippled through the room. Victor's voice softened. If Brandon contests this will, it will only prove my point. I love him, but I won't reward greed disguised as grief. The screen went dark. Silence. The kind that hums in your bones. I covered my mouth with my hand. Tears slipped down my cheeks before I could stop them. The judge cleared his throat. Court will recess for 15 minutes. When we returned, Cross looked pale. Brandon avoided my gaze. Vanessa whispered something, but he brushed her off. The judge's tone was sharper now. Mr. Cross, do you still intend to pursue this claim? Cross swallowed hard. Yes, Your Honor. Very well, the judge said. Let's proceed. Thomas stood. Your Honor, the defense calls Ruth Callahan. My heart hammered as I rose. My legs felt heavy, but my steps were steady. I took the oath and sat in the witness chair. Mrs. Callahan, Thomas began gently, could you tell the court a little about your life before you married Victor? I hesitated. This was the part no one knew, not even my son. I was an attorney, I said. Graduated from Berkeley Law in 1975. Worked as a public defender, then for the district attorney's office in San Francisco. Later, I started my own firm. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Brandon blinked, his mouth falling open slightly. He hadn't known. Thomas continued. Why did you leave your career? I met Brandon's eyes. Because he was 5. Because his father's company was growing and someone had to be home. I wanted my son to have both parents, even if it meant giving up the future I'd built for myself. The courtroom was silent except for the faint rustle of papers. Do you regret that choice? Thomas asked. I smiled faintly. Not until today. Judge Hartley leaned forward. Mrs. Callahan, what was your maiden name? Ruth Patterson, Your Honor. The judge's eyebrows lifted. Patterson. I remember you. You mentored me when I was a public defender. You taught me how to cross-examine. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Cross shifted uncomfortably. Objection, relevance. Overruled, the judge said, eyes still on me. Please continue, Mr. Morrison. Thomas turned to the jury. The plaintiff would have you believe Mrs. Callahan manipulated her husband. In reality, she's a woman who built her life around integrity. A woman her husband trusted more than anyone. He paused. And now, we have one final witness. Robert Chen, Victor's business partner, took the stand. Calm, measured. Robert, Thomas said, can you describe Victor's mental state before his passing? Sharp, Robert replied. He was negotiating contracts and mentoring startups right up to the end. Did Victor ever mention concerns about his son? Robert hesitated, glancing at me, then said, yes. 6 months before he died, Brandon came to me privately. He wanted me to help him push Victor out of the company. Said his father was too old, losing touch. He even suggested selling his father's shares behind his back. The courtroom erupted in whispers. That's a lie. Brandon shouted, jumping to his feet. Sit down, Mr. Callahan, the judge barked, gavel cracking like thunder. Robert held up a folder. I have the emails. Cross's face was drained of color. Thomas approached the bench. Your Honor, the defense rests. The judge looked directly at Brandon. Do you have anything to add before I rule? Brandon sank back into his chair, silent. Judge Hartley's expression hardened. Mr. Callahan, your father's will is valid. Your accusations are baseless and offensive. This court denies your petition. And frankly, you should be ashamed. He turned to me, his voice softening. Mrs. Callahan, I'm sorry for what you've endured. It's good to see you again, and even better to see you still have your fire. He lifted the gavel. Case dismissed. The sound echoed through the courtroom like a victory drum. Brandon sat frozen. Vanessa looked away, face pale. Thomas touched my shoulder. You did it, Ruth. I rose slowly, every ache in my body melting away under a wave of relief. As I gathered my papers, I glanced toward my son. For the first time, he wouldn't meet my eyes. I didn't gloat. I didn't speak. I just walked past him, my heels clicking against the tile, steady, unhurried, strong. The door closed behind me, but the echo stayed, ringing like a promise that this story wasn't ending here. The courtroom emptied slowly, murmurs following me like a faint storm that had lost its power. I thought it was over. I thought walking out those doors would be the end of it. But as I reached the hallway, I stopped. I wasn't finished. I turned back to Thomas. There's one more thing, I said. He gave me a look, half questioning, half knowing. You're sure? I nodded. I'm sure. We walked back into the courtroom. The clerk looked startled when I spoke. Your Honor, I said, steady and clear, before we adjourn, I have additional evidence to submit. Judge Hartley raised a brow. Go ahead, Mrs. Callahan. I opened my handbag and pulled out a folder. The same folder Victor had shown me months before but that I'd kept sealed until now. These are financial statements from my husband's company, I explained. They document unauthorized withdrawals by Brandon Callahan over several years, personal vacations, luxury purchases, and fraudulent expense claims. Cross shifted uneasily. Brandon's face went pale. Judge Hartley accepted the folder from Thomas, flipping through the pages. His expression darkened. Is this true, Mr. Callahan? Brandon stammered, I was going to pay it back. You stole from your father's company, the judge said flatly. And then you had the nerve to accuse your mother of manipulation? I took a deep breath. Victor knew. He kept records of every transaction. He didn't press charges because he couldn't bear to destroy his son's reputation. But I no longer have that weakness. The judge studied me for a long moment, then gave a small, approving nod. Proceed. I'm filing a civil suit for the return of $340,000, I said. Plus interest. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Brandon's jaw tightened. You can't do this. I can, I said softly. And there's more. The will includes a clause: if you contest it in bad faith, you forfeit your inheritance entirely. Vanessa turned toward him, eyes wide. What clause? Brandon looked at me in horror. You're lying. Thomas held up the document. No, she's not. Page 6, paragraph 2. Signed and notarized. Judge Hartley smiled faintly, the first hint of warmth since the trial began. Mrs. Callahan, it's rare to see someone handle both heartbreak and justice with such precision. You've reminded this court what integrity looks like. Brandon collapsed back into his chair, defeated. Vanessa shifted away from him, her expression calculating, distant. She already looked like someone planning her exit. Mr. Callahan, the judge continued, you not only lose this case, but your inheritance is void. You will return the funds you took from your father's company. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell one last time, sharp, final. Brandon buried his face in his hands. Vanessa gathered her purse and stood without a word. She didn't look back as she walked out, heels clicking across the marble floor. I watched her leave. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her, almost. Thomas turned to me. You handled that masterfully, Ruth. I smiled faintly. I learned from the best. He chuckled. Judge Hartley would agree. Outside, the afternoon sun bathed the courthouse steps in gold. I paused halfway down, breathing in the crisp air. For the first time in years, the ache in my chest began to ease. In the distance, reporters gathered near the entrance, their cameras flashing. I didn't stop for interviews. I'd already said everything that needed saying. As I reached the car, I looked up at the sky and whispered, "We did it, Victor." If you believe karma always finds its way home, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life lessons from this channel. 6 months passed before I realized I was breathing easily again. The Napa Valley house no longer felt like a tomb of memories. The echoes of the past had softened, replaced by quiet purpose. The garden was alive again, roses blooming in radiant color, vines climbing the trellis Victor built with his own hands. Every morning, I walked among them with a cup of tea, letting the scent of fresh earth and sunlight remind me that endings can become beginnings if you let them. Inside the house, laughter had returned, not from family dinners or parties, but from the small group of women who gathered in what used to be Victor's study. Some were mothers who'd left their careers to raise children, others had faced setbacks, divorces, or the kind of heartbreak that silences confidence. Together, we'd built the Ruth Patterson Callahan Foundation for women returning to law. We offered scholarships, mentorship, and a place for women to rebuild what life had paused. Every time one of them spoke about reclaiming her voice, I felt a spark of recognition, a reminder of the woman I'd once been, and the one I'd found again. One afternoon, while reviewing applications, my phone rang. Mrs. Callahan? The voice was familiar, warm. It's William Hartley. I smiled. Judge Hartley. To what do I owe the honor? He chuckled. I'm calling about something close to both our hearts. The city's starting a pro bono initiative for elder abuse cases. We need someone with your experience, someone who understands both the law and compassion. Would you consider it? I paused, looking around at the foundation office filled with sunlight and framed photos of the women we'd helped. For years I defined myself by what I'd lost, now I was measured by what I could still give. I'd be honored, I said. Good, he replied. You always had fire in you. It's good to see it burning again. After the call, I stepped outside into the garden. The afternoon light spilled over the roses, painting everything gold. Somewhere in the distance, wind chimes sang softly. A delivery truck stopped at the gate, and the driver handed me a single envelope. No return address. I didn't need one to know who it was from. Inside was a short note in Brandon's handwriting. "I'm sorry, Mom." No explanation. No promise to change. Just those 3 words. For a long moment, I stood there, the letter trembling between my fingers. Then I walked to the fire pit at the edge of the garden, struck a match, and held it over the paper. The flame caught quickly. I watched it curl, darken, and finally turn to ash that drifted into the evening breeze. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel triumph. Just release. Sometimes the best revenge isn't winning, it's remembering who you truly are. I turned back toward the garden. Patty was waiting on the porch, waving. "Lunch at our usual spot," she called. "Wouldn't miss it," I said, smiling. As I joined her, the camera would linger on the roses swaying gently in the sunlight, living proof that beauty can grow from pain if you're brave enough to plant again. You don't owe forgiveness to people who are only sorry they got caught.